Zone. Well, again, I'm glad my family's here today. And what I'm going to share with you today is about two warriors of World War II coming to battle against each other. It's called Humanity for Your Enemy. Before I start this, I have to share with you something called the Warrior's Code that Chile gave me. It's about how men of war, must feel about killing another man. And I'm sure both sides of the war feel the same way. The Warrior's Code. Warriors need a way to distinguish what they must do out of a sense of duty from what a serial killer does for the sheer sadistic pleasure of it. Their actions, like those of the serial killer, set them apart from the rest of society. Warriors, however, are not sociopaths. They respect the values of the society in which they were raised and which they are prepared to die to protect. Therefore, it is important for them to conduct themselves in such a way that they will be honored and esteemed by their communities, not reviled and rejected by them. They want to be seen as proud defenders and representatives of what is best about their culture, as heroes, not just killers. By setting high standards for themselves, warriors can create a lifeline that will allow them to pull themselves out of the hell of war and reintegrate themselves into their society. A warrior's code may cover everything from the treatment of prisoners of war to oath keeping, to table etiquette, but its primary purpose is to grant nobility to the warrior's profession. This allows warriors to retain both self-respect and the respect of those they guard. Humanity for your enemy. The time is December 1943. The U.S. Army, oh, by the way, I'm sorry, I was supposed to start this. This is a true story. True story. The U.S. Army Air Corps B-17 bombers, picture on the wall, hundreds of them have been dropping thousands of bombs on Germany, not only on military bases, but on cities as well. The German Messerschmitt fighter plane have been attacking these bombers in hatred and revenge for destroying their homeland, as you can see why. What I'm going to share with you is a true story about how a German fighter pilot, instead of shooting down a terribly shattered B-17, out of honor and respect, led this crew of 10 through enemy skies to safety to the English Channel so they could go home safely to England. It is about humanity for your enemy in its highest order. The 21-year-old American B-17 pilot, Charles Brown, glanced out of his cockpit window and froze. He blinked hard and looked again, hoping it was a mirage. But his co-pilot stared at the same horrible vision. My God, this is a nightmare. He's going to destroy us. The men were looking at the gray German Messerschmitt, 1943, and the fighter pilot had closed in for the kill. The B-17 had taken roughly 200 bullet holes in its wings and fuselage. One of the 4 engines was dead, and another one was sputtering and flames shooting out of it time and again. It was about to go. One half of the tail of this plane was shot off. They were helpless with no American fighter planes around to protect her. Lieutenant Brown's crippled B-17 was being stalked by Franz Stigler, right there. The B-17 pilot, Charles Brown, was a West Virginia farm boy on his first combat mission. His bomber had been shot to pieces by swarming fighters, and his plane was alone, struggling to stay in the skies above Germany. Half of his 10-man crew were wounded, and the tail gunner was dead. But when Brown and his co-pilot looked at the fighter pilot, Again, something odd happened. The German didn't pull the trigger. He stared back at the bomber in amazement and respect. Instead of pressing the attack, he nodded at Brown and saluted. What happened next was one of the most remarkable acts of chivalry recorded during World War II. Luftwaffe Major Franz Stigler pressed his hand against his rosary he kept in his flight jacket. He eased his finger off the trigger. He couldn't shoot. It would be murder. Stigler wasn't just motivated by vengeance that day. He also lived by a code. He could trace his family's ancestry to the knights of the 16th century in Europe. He also once studied to be a priest. A German pilot who spared his enemy, though, risked death in Nazi Germany. If he knew someone should report him, he would be executed. Yet Stigler could only hear the voice of his commanding officer, who once told him, "You follow the rules of war for you, not your enemy. You fight for rules to keep your humanity." Alone with the crippled bomber, Stigler chased his mission. He nodded to the American pilot and began flying in formation, so German anti-aircraft gunners on the ground wouldn't shoot down the slow-moving bomber. The Germans had B-17s of their own that they had shot down, rebuilt for secret missions and training. Stigler escorted the bomber over the North Sea and took one last look at the American pilot. He saluted him again and peeled his fighter plane away and returned to Germany. "Good luck," Stigler said to himself. "You're in God's hands now." Stigler didn't think the B-17 could make it back to back to England, and wondered for years what happened to that American pilot and crew he encountered in combat. As Lieutenant Brown watched the German fighter pilot peel away that December day, he wasn't thinking of the philosophical connection between enemies. He was thinking of survival. He flew his crippled plane filled with wounded back to his base in England and landed with one engine out and one more about to die. After his bomber came to a stop, he leaned back in his seat and put a hand over a pocket Bible he kept in his flight jacket. Then he sat in silence. Brown flew more missions before the war ended. Life moved on. He got married, had 2 daughters, supervised foreign aid for the U.S. Department during the Vietnam War, and eventually retired to Florida. Late in life, though, the encounter with the German pilot began to gnaw at him. He started having nightmares, but in his dreams there was no mercy. He would awaken just before the bomber crashed. Brown took on a new mission. He had to find that German pilot. Who was he? Why did he save my life? He looked up military records in the U.S. and England. Nothing. He attended a pilot's reunion and shared his story. Nothing. He finally placed an ad in a German newspaper for former Luftwaffe pilots, retelling the story and asking if anyone knew the pilot. On January the 18th, 1990, 48 years after the encounter, Brown received a letter. He opened it and read, "Dear Charles, all these years I wondered what happened to that B-17. Did she make it home? Did the crew survive the wounds? To hear of your survival has filled me with indescribable joy." It was Stigler. He had left Germany after the war and moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. In 1953, he became a prosperous businessman. Now retired, Stigler told Brown that he would be in Florida come summer, and it would sure be nice to talk about our encounter. Brown was so excited he couldn't wait to see Stigler. He called directory assistance for Vancouver and asked whether there was a number for Franz Stigler. They got it. Great. He dialed the number and Stigler picked up. "My God, it's you," Brown shouted, and tears ran down his cheeks. Brown had to do one more. He wrote a letter to Stigler in which he said, to say thank you, thank you, thank you on behalf of my surviving crew members and their family seems totally inadequate. The two pilots would meet again, but this time in person in the lobby of a Florida hotel. One of Brown's friends was there to record the summer reunion. Both men looked like retired businessmen. They were plump, sporting neat ties and formal shirts. They fell into each other's arms and wept and laughed. They talked about their encounter in a light, jovial tone. The mood had then changed. Someone asked Stigler what he thought about Brown. Stigler sighed and his square jaw tightened. He began to fight back tears before he said in a heavily accented English, "I love you, Charlie." Stigler had lost his brother, his friends, and his country. He was virtually exiled by his countrymen after the war. Get this. There were 28,000 pilots who fought for the German Air Force. Only 1,200 survived. The war cost him everything. Charlie Brown was the only good thing that came out of World War II for France. It was the only thing he could be proud of. The meeting helped Brown a great deal also, says his oldest daughter, Dawn Warner. They set out as enemies, but Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown ended up as fishing buddies. They became pals. They would take fishing trips together. They would fly cross country to each other's homes. I personally think the following togetherness of these two guys, they took road trips together to share their story at schools and veterans reunions and all across the nation. Their wives, Jackie Brown and Haya Stigler, became good friends. Both Brown's daughters said that her father would worry about Stigler's health and constantly check in on him. It wasn't just for show, she said. They really did feel for each other, and they talked about once a week. As his friendship deepened with Stigler, something else happened to her father. The nightmares went away. Early on, Brown had written a letter of thanks to Stigler, but one day he showed his extent of his gratitude. He organized a reunion of his surviving crew members along with their extended families. He invited Stigler as a guest of honor. During the reunion, a video was played showing all the many faces of the people who now lived, children, grandchildren, relatives, thanks to Stigler's act of chivalry. These people would have never been here were it not for this man. Stigler watched the film from his seat of honor. Everyone was crying, not just him, said Warner. Stigler and Brown died within months of each other in 2008. Stigler was at 92, Brown was 87. They had started off as enemies, became friends, and then something more. After Brown died, his daughter Warner was searching through the library and came across a book on German fighter jets. Stigler had given the book to Brown. Both were country boys who loved to read about planes. Warner opened the book and saw an inscription Stigler had written to Brown, to which read, "In 1940, I lost my only brother as a night fighter. On the 20th of December, 4 days before Christmas, I had the chance to save a B-17 from her destruction. Charlie Brown, the pilot, is for me now as precious as my brother was. Thank you, Charlie. Your brother, Franz." One thing I'd like to share at the end here was something that happened to me when I was flying with the Navy. We were flying out of Japan flying along the coast. This was during the Cold War with Russia. We were flying along the Sea of Japan looking for submarines, and we had to stay 50 miles off the coast of Russia. But all of a sudden the radar operator says, "Sir, we have a plane coming up on our rear." And all of a sudden, this Russian jet came up right beside the plane we were in. Kind of a chill ran down my back. But I took out a little American flag I had like that, and I waved it, and he nodded, and he took out a Russian flag and waved back at me, and he peeled off and went home. Thank you.